Have you ever felt truly and deeply alone? That you are completely isolated behind thick walls or an invisible shell, even when surrounded by a crowd of people or friends? Humans, like most other animals, thrive when they feel connected to others. So it makes sense that loneliness, which is very different from making a choice to spend time alone, negatively impacts physical, emotional, and mental health. And research shows us that connection is the key. So I've reached out to a top connection expert for insights on this very important topic. Today, we'll focus on this listener's real life question. I'm an introvert and have had a lot of trouble getting back into life post-pandemic. I'm depressed and anxious most days. My partner was my biggest source of companionship before and after the pandemic, but we broke up 6 months ago. It's hard to socialize because I work remotely. My family is back east, so we have text and video calls, but it's not enough. How can I make things get better? And with that question as the focus of today's episode, I'm Dr. Carla Manly, and this is Imperfect Love.
Welcome to Imperfect Love with Dr. Carla Manly, psychologist, author, and relationship expert. I'm here to help unravel mysteries and misconceptions about love, relationships, and mental health issues, plus everything in between. Love is complicated, people are not perfect, and relationships surely can be tough. Together, we'll navigate this messy, imperfect space of real life.
Please note, as this episode may contain sensitive information, listener discretion is advised. If you need support, please see the special links in the show notes. Today, I'm joined by a very special guest, Dr. Adam Dorsay, psychologist, TEDx speaker, author, podcaster, and connection expert who teamed up with Facebook to create the International Resiliency Program. Dr. Adam is the author of the tremendous book, Super Psyched, Unleash the Power of the 4 Types of Connection and Live the Life You Love. Welcome to the podcast, Dr. Dorsay, or should I say Dr. Adam?
Or just Adam will be fine. May I call you Carla?
Please do.
I'm so delighted to be with you. Just in the minutes before we actually recorded in the so-called green room, I got to know a little bit about you and your work and your loves. Oh, it's just wonderful to have a new friend and colleague.
It's lovely to connect with you, and we have so much in common, as we found during our very brief conversation, including our love of Jungian psychology and writing and dream analysis and all of those yummy bits that are behind the scenes. So before we launch into the topic of today, could you tell our listeners just a little bit about what makes you, you?
Sure. So one of the things that makes me me was actually the byproduct of the nickname I received from the drummer in my garage band in high school. He named me Enthusiasm. And indeed, I came out of the womb a little more on the enthusiastic side of life. Maybe lovely to some, insufferable to others, perhaps. But I really get excited about things. I remember sitting in college across from somebody describing something that was amazing to me. And the woman across the table said, "Wow, you're easily impressed." And I said, "I don't think I'm easily impressed. I think I have a very high threshold for appreciation." And I was really glad that I said that because that was absolutely my truth. And I'd say the last thing, I heard an Alex Trebek quote, the former Jeopardy host, apparently said something to the effect of, "I'm so curious about things that I'm even interested in things I'm not interested in." And anyway, I'm profoundly curious about stuff in general, even the stuff that I'm ostensibly not interested in. So that's what I would say about me.
There's something else we have in common, the power of curiosity. It is interesting because curiosity, not only does it, I believe it gives us a very youthful energy because kiddos are
Mm-hmm.
curious about everything. They want to eat everything, touch everything, find everything, play in everything. They're kind of like dogs in a way, in that way, where if you have a puppy, you see it wants to get into everything. And I really think that as adults, it's so important for us to maintain that energy because curiosity keeps us going, as you said, even into things you're not curious about per se. If you work at being curious or open that door to curiosity, not only do you grow within yourself and maybe discover something that you thought you didn't like that you do like, but also you've formed a bond with another person where you've stepped into their world. I'm thinking of a time when I like mechanical things. I wasn't really exposed to them because I was raised to be a girly girl. And my husband was doing a hobby and was rebuilding an engine on something. And I popped out into his garage and I said, honey, will you teach me to rebuild an engine? And he's like, what? And so he had this one smaller engine and we pulled it apart and put it back together. And even though I don't remember, I couldn't do it on my own, but that curiosity to do that and join with him, all of those things, whether we're joining with a kid in our lives or a coworker or a fellow podcaster, whatever it might be, it really opens up the mind and the spirit. Curiosity, don't you think?
1,000,000%. And one thing that the listener might not be able to see over my right shoulder is there is a tiny wooden box. And in it contains the remains of my very first cat. Now, I was I just hated cats. Like the degree to which I hated cats, I can't even tell you. I was never mean to cats, but if I saw a cat around, I just wanted to go the other direction. Well, a cat came into my life and he was awesome. And I fell madly in love with him. He ended up being one of the greatest teachers I ever had. I'm still absolutely a dog person, but now I am a switch hitter. I will be happy to be around cats or dogs, especially if they're dog-like cats. And I still don't particularly love the skittish type. This guy, his name was Yoda, and he will always be with me because of that bond that I share. But the reason I bring him up right now and how he relates to your motor or your rebuilding of an engine is I never thought I would be into cats. And now cats have been one of the great teachers and healers in my life. So I really resonate with that idea of just, stretching. And since cognitive rigidity is a hallmark, of so many things that we don't want in psychology, and cognitive flexibility is a component of what we're looking for, I really look to cats as having been my midwife into a more flexible thinking style.
Before we pop into the word cognitive flexibility for our listeners, because I don't want to take for granted that people really understand what we're talking about with that.
My apologies for using jargon.
I love jargon. I love jargon because it gives us a chance to dive into jargon. So jargon's good. It just gives us an opportunity to pause. And I love my digressive pauses. So no worry. I noticed the box on your windowsill, and listeners, for those of you who aren't seeing this on YouTube, it looks like what, a 4x6 box, like a tiny, darling little box. And here's another common thing between us is my first dog, who happened to be much larger than a cat, who was also one of my greatest teachers, a Great Dane. And I still have his ashes and some in a tiny little silver vial that go with me everywhere. And I think this relates to the listener's question and to the listener's issue. We often think that it's human connection and just human connection that can meet our needs.
Right.
And I'm a firm believer that a relationship with an animal, whether it's one that we are given the beautiful responsibility and privilege of taking care of, like you have a dog and I have, my giant schnauzer, and it's such a privilege, and they give so much in times where there are feelings of loneliness or isolation or frustration. Those pets, cats, dogs, people have rabbits and birds. We don't want to underestimate the joy they can give us and that sense of connection to the planet and to parts of the self. And I know there's an owl that lives in an owl house across my yard. And even my relationship with Minerva, who I'm not even on her radar. I don't really think she cares too much about me, but maybe she does. I don't know. But when we connect with something beyond the self, yes, of course, it's also lovely to have human relationships. But for this individual, having a relationship maybe with a neighbor's pet or volunteering at a humane society or adopting a pet or even a fish, it is so lovely to have some other life form proximate. It really is. And then it becomes a give and take, and you can have conversations. And is it crazy to have a conversation with a pet? I'll ask you.
I would say not. And I would even say that the research corroborates this idea. And we can believe in it or not believe in the idea of the pet human bond, but the research is very solid. Having a pet and having a really strong bond with that pet can and really cause us to release our endogenous feel-good hormones, our serotonin levels, our oxytocin, the cuddle hormone, dopamine. These all go up. My friend Carol Novello, who used to run the Humane Society in Silicon Valley, she was a CEO there. She wrote a book called Mutual Rescue, where she basically decides that, the idea is that when we rescue a pet, the pet often rescues us right back. Now, there are other people. My father, for example, could go several lifetimes and not have any compulsion to touch a pet. He doesn't feel fulfilled by that. And part of the reason I wrote this book on connection is each of us has our unique connection formulas. My father, on the other hand, is, and by the way, I can't even go a day without touching one of my pets. I love being with my pets, and I definitely do talk to my pets. And I think most people do talk to their pets, whether they admit it or not. But my father,
raising my hand, talk to it all the time.
Yeah, and we were talking offline that this book the 4 books you've written came through you. This book came through me as well. I really want people to engage in what I believe is their birthright to connection. And each of us has our own formulas for connection. My father, who doesn't wish to touch a pet at all, could enjoy a 6-hour Wagnerian opera. And for me, that would be a very expensive place to sleep. For him, it's pure joy. And an essential part of his connection formula is he is an opera man. Now, I wouldn't mind a shorter opera. Carmen or something like that would be just fine. But sitting for 6 hours, I'm definitely going to doze off. And one of the problems that we have is oftentimes due to the mirroring we received as children, what we were told we should be into this or we should be into that based on our gender or, other patterns or beliefs that our parents have, that we unwittingly disconnect from our true formulas. And the formula is a perpetually evolving one. When you feel like you're coming alive. For example, you went to a Jungian school to get your doctorate, and nobody needed to tell you that this was a place that you would come alive. You knew it because you felt it in your body, in your brain, in your heart, all of these places. And one of the things I aim to do in this book, in addition to helping people connect in the 4 ways that we connect, is to define connection, because everybody's talking about this word connection, but I have not really seen it defined. And to the best of my ability to define it, and I went with about 10 of my colleagues, and I together came up with a working definition. It's something that brings life force to us. And you know it when you feel it, and and nobody needs to tell you it's there. You just know it.
You're making me think of something I've noticed over time, that when you're in a car, airport, sidewalk, and you meet somebody's eyes, they can be 10 feet away, they can be 30 feet away. And that eye-to-eye contact, they've seen you, you've seen them. That is, one way to see connection where you saw each other. You feel it. That energy is there, that indescribable sense of my life force has met your life force.
Mm-hmm.
And we can turn the volume up on that, or we can turn. Do you know what I mean?
For sure. And sometimes it's sustainable. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's an instant and it's gone. and you start talking to the person, you find out there was just something, in the air, but nothing more. And sometimes you find out, wow, actually, thank God we took a moment and started talking because we were absolutely meant to meet.
Absolutely. And I love the serendipity of things like that, or just like the two of us talking beforehand, going, oh, we have this in common. So, now let's go to just two definitions before I'll probably ask you for more. But before we talk about finding that connection and that unique formula for the self. So if you would please explain for our listeners cognitive flexibility and why it matters so much, and mirroring, because people might not understand why those two concepts and many more are so important for self-growth, for self-worth.
Sure. Well, my definitions will not necessarily be the most erudite. They are not textbook definitions, but to the best of my ability to describe cognitive flexibility, oftentimes it's to the opposite of cognitive rigidity, where we see things as yes or no. And you and I have both grown up. When we were children, we knew there were bad guys and good guys. And as we got older, we began to see, wait, it's on a spectrum. This person who seems like a good guy actually does some pretty bad things. And the guy who seems like he's a bad guy actually does some pretty good things. It's not just black and white. And black and white thinking is considered a distorted way of thinking. And being able to say, there's this and that, there's nuance, there's more to the story. And then just a simple, one bit conclusion. And our brains are not meant to think anything but black and white, because our brains really have two primary directives. One is to survive and the other is to conserve energy. And so our brains, left to their default systems, are rather rigid. But as we evolve, as we grow, as we learn, we begin to see, wait, there's more to the story. It's like, on this hand, yes, that's happening. But on the other hand, still, there's an old, I love this joke. I'm allowed to tell it because I'm Jewish, but two men are arguing and they realize they're never going to come to the right conclusion. So they bring their argument to the rabbi, and the rabbi listens and strokes his beard and says, finally, you, sir, are correct. And to the other one, and you, sir, are also correct. And somebody who overheard says, they can't both be correct. And the rabbi says, and you are also correct. So the fact is, there are many sides to a story. There's a great Kurosawa film called Rashomon, where you see multiple people describing a crime that transpired, and each of them describes it from their vantage point, and it's so different. It's kind of like the elephant and the blind men parable from, I believe it stems from Sufism, where each of them is touching a part of the elephant, and each is convinced that the elephant is flat like a pancake because he's touching the ear, or rope-like because he's touching the tail, etc., trunk-like like a tree. So cognitive flexibility is the ability to recognize that there's a multiplicity of truths that are going on at the same time. In terms of the other question that you asked.
Let me pause. I gave you two questions at once. Mm-hmm. So let me pause on this one.
Sure. I
Thank you for that. And just add, so that I'm weaving it back to the listener's question a bit, that
there was a listener's question just now?
Oh, no. I'm sorry. The one at the beginning where I'm trying to take it back to loneliness.
Oh, sure.
When that cognitive flexibility helps us get out of that frame, that dichotomous thinking.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So let me speak to that. So oftentimes when we are anxious, our creativity goes down the tubes. We think there is no possible solution when, in fact, there are probably many solutions. One of the things that I remember from high school, and this is a horrible example, and I'm sorry, trigger alert slightly, but the bullies in school used to the big guy would go up to the little guy, grab it, that's horrible, 1980s, grab his nipple, turn it 90 degrees, and ask the poor guy, name 3 Japanese cars. And there's no way they could even name one Japanese car because they were in too much duress. And oftentimes, so that's a real kind of visceral, I know that's a really violent description, and I apologize for it, but oftentimes when we are in turmoil, on our own, it can feel like that. And we can feel like there is no possible solution. So one of the things that happens in the height of anxiety is a scarcity of creativity. And we become cognitively rigid. One of the things that we can think of is, like, how do we get our bodies into a relaxed state? For some of us, it's going into warm water. For some of us, it's working out. For some of us, it's seeing a comedy routine. Comedy can be a great disruptor of this spin of rigidity, because comedians, if they do anything well, they are really flexible and they can cause you to laugh, and laughter will stir up all the good stuff and get you from that place of scarcity to a place of like possibility. And when we're lonely, and you differentiated those so beautifully, I mean, there's a difference between solitude, which is being alone by choice, and it's good for us. I mean, we like this, silent retreats and being alone and just hanging out in our pajamas and our fuzzy bunny slippers. Those are great. And we need that, and we would choose that. But loneliness runs against the nature of the core of our existence. We even have some indications. I hope it's not apocryphal. I believe it's true. But I've heard anecdotes of plant life even doing better when they are two and have music around them. So that's a very interesting phenomenon. We are not meant to be alone all the time. Solitude, yes, sometimes to recharge our batteries. But each of us, no matter how much of an introvert we might be, needs some form of human connection. And each of us has different feeding schedules. Some of us are super extroverted and kind of like a dog who just needs to be around all the time with the tail wagging and like, I can't wait to see you again. My friend Britt Frank describes feeding schedules as being akin to our need, mimicking our needs for human connection. She said there are hummingbirds who need to feed all the time. And there are scorpions, and apparently scorpions, I'm not talking about the poisonous elements, but their feeding schedules they don't need to eat all that much. They can eat like once a month, apparently, and be rather sated. I hope I believe Britt because she's very smart, but I like thinking about that in those terms. And introverts tend to need less of that kind of in-your-face social connection, and they need more time to recharge. Anyway, loneliness is bad for us no matter what. The Surgeon General has issued a warning that loneliness at pandemic levels. We have evidence that loneliness can be actually very deleterious to our health. It can actually be worse than smoking cigarettes in some ways. And I think up to 15 cigarettes was the figure. And it can be worse than some of our cholesterol readings. It's even more indicative of mortality. So what can we do? Well, we can think outside the box. We can talk to a therapist like you. I'm guessing that if somebody had the privilege of speaking with you or listening to your podcast, they would come up with new ideas. An idea that I would have, it's not a brilliant idea by any stretch, but there's often a distance between what we know and what we do. And if people are willing to do the thing, it will help. But join a meetup group for something that you like anyway, and have the vulnerability to talk to somebody. You might drive home having met nobody that felt like there was a connection there. And at least you will have done something you liked. But there's a chance that someone else there is hoping to meet you. They just don't know it yet. And one of the things that I'm so grateful to Brené Brown for is she has really become public about the idea that vulnerability is a precursor for courage. And courage is one of the greatest of all virtues. And if we are not vulnerable, if we are not a little bit scared, we are not exhibiting courage. I mean, a good example is, let's imagine I decided to go skydiving, something I probably will never do. But if I did, it would be a massively courageous act because I would be very vulnerable and very scared. But the teacher who would be with me in the tandem of the parachute has probably done it 500 times. And there's no courage there, because for that teacher, that would be just like, me hopping onto a Zoom call, which I'm very used to doing. No, not a lot of courage required for me to jump onto a Zoom call. Very little vulnerability at this stage of the game. So when we're lonely, we may actually also feel less courageous, because one of the other studies that we know about is when people look at a mountain that they're about to climb and they are alone, they judge the grade as being more severe than they do when they are in company. They actually judge the grade as far less severe when they are in comfortable company. So we really do need social support. And you are providing, Carla, social support in this way to the listener who will feel encouraged, and they may be able to internalize you and carry you with them when they do the courageous thing that they need to do to feel less lonely.
Such brilliant points. And listeners, I'm going to do a quick recap because they are so important. And they're really getting to things we can do when we get away from the cognitive rigidity. I am alone. The world is dark. The world is scary. That's understandable. That's what happens when we become anxious and depressed and stressed. And moving into that world, as you were saying, the world of possibility, baby stepping it toward, listen to a podcast, find a mental health podcast, look for a Facebook group of people who are stressed or anxious. There are tons of them out there, so you immediately know you're not alone. If you can, so many of the things you said, join a meetup group, go and volunteer. All of these things, take a walk down the sidewalk or around your neighborhood, pet somebody's dog. All of these things, and I'm not minimizing the courage that it takes the first, second, third, fourth time you're doing these things. I don't know if you've ever been there, Adam, in your life, but I surely have, where you're getting so out of your comfort zone that first podcast, that first
Oh my God.
statement, that first time you're with a client, I still remember that, like, am I going to do this right? The first time I led a big group, all of these firsts, no matter how much education or experience we have, firsts are scary and
terrifying.
Oh my goodness. And I've learned to look at that inner terror as just an overactive system that's trying to protect me on a very primitive level. And if I just be with the anxiety, move through the anxiety, and do that next step, then I move through that anxiety, that terror, and the next time I do it, it's easier. And so for our listener and all those people out there, here's the other piece you said that I so believe in. If you're lonely and you're on a block of people, 20 other houses, 30 other houses, apartments, whatever, chances are someone next to you or the third house down or the fourth apartment up is also lonely and suffering in silence. So the chances are, if you reach out to somebody is going to be there waiting, saying, oh, thank you for stopping by. Oh, thank you for sharing those extra cookies with me. Something. So doing those. So I appreciate that you brought that up and the importance of being courageous, because courage, different from bravery. Bravery is moving forward when you're not afraid. Courage is moving forward when you are afraid. And I have such respect for courage, because all of us face situations that are scary sometimes, and moving through that scary situation, especially if it's not one like a dog's biting, getting ready to bite you, or there's a tiger or a bear waiting around the corner. If it's just an unrealistic fear, which can feel very big and scary, especially when you're lonely and stressed and anxious and depressed, taking one baby step forward, pausing and giving yourself a pat on the back for having done that one act of courage. That can help with cognitive flexibility. Don't you think, Adam?
I mean, 1,000,000%, yes. You said a few things that I just have to comment on. The first of which is I was diagnosed very late in life, at the age of 27, with ADHD of the inattentive type, which explained a lot of why school was so hard for me. I was in special ed for 5 years, and people would use really, really bad language to describe my intellectual performance. So I bathed for 5 years, thinking myself to be uneducatable. I also was severely dyslexic, and it was very hard for me to get through college on the first round. And so the amount of courage it took for me to get back into graduate school at some point and to see my first client, it was utterly terrifying. And Oprah said something akin to, everything you want is on the other side of fear. And I love that idea. And of course, I'm not talking about reckless fear. I'm not talking about, going out and base jumping or, trying to wrestle with a bear or something. I'm not talking about recklessness, but I am talking about the things that you actually want in life. the other thing you said about the person 3 doors down who may also be really sad or lonely. You and I both have probably been very well educated on this burgeoning research on self-compassion. And one of the ways that we can actually rock self-compassion, by the way, self-compassion seems to be correlated with virtually every good outcome possible, so much so. And Chris Germer, who was on my podcast, was talking about this, that even the Navy SEALs use it to great advantage because it gets results better and faster. But the 3 ways that we can do it are talking to ourselves the way we would talk to a friend. I mean, if we talk to our friends the way we talk to ourselves, we would have no friends, and may even lionize the idea of speaking to ourselves poorly. It's not good for us, folks. Speak to ourselves the way we speak to friends is a really, really good first start. The second one is, mindfulness, seeing it for what it is, being aware of what's going on while it's going on and not making it bigger than what it is. And the third is realizing that everyone on the planet, that suffering is universal. And the person a few doors down is maybe suffering, and maybe would very much welcome that call. Even if they don't necessarily demonstrate that they do, you don't know what they're thinking. But the other thing that it made me think of, particularly because we're dog people, is there is a ton of research that indicates that people are far more likely to be engaged by others when they're walking down the street if they have a dog.
Yes.
And if I was to walk by myself, nobody's going to engage me. They're going to say, well, hey, mister on the black shirt, nice to see you. But if I'm walking with my adorable dog, and when my beautiful dog died, 𝐂𝐎𝐍𝐶, and I was just totally bereft. And one of my areas of expertise is in pet loss and pet related grief. One of the exercises I put myself through was I made a list of all of the people 𝐂𝐿𝐶 introduced me to.
Oh.
It was somewhere around 60. It was somewhere between 40 and 60. I can't quite remember the exact number, but it was, and many of whom were really good people for my life. Actually, one of whom got me my first TEDx talk. So, you just never know who your dog will introduce you to. One of the people was the guy who designed the first Apple logo. I mean, just crazy stuff. And I never would have met him otherwise. He only engaged me because I had the dog. So if you're a dog person, first of all, your loneliness will go down in all likelihood, and your positive feel-good hormones will be increased. Really good for depression, anxiety, a whole host of other things, and trauma. My goodness, it's good for all that.
Oh, absolutely.
And you'll probably meet some people you wouldn't otherwise have met.
I 100% agree with you. I think of all of the people I have met or reconnected with because of walking with my dog. So thank you for affirming that. Listeners know the Humane Society is not supporting this podcast.
Yeah.
They might be enjoying it, but we really believe this from our hearts and from our lived experience. So hopping over to mirroring.
Mirroring, that's right.
It's one of my favorite topics because before I ask you to define it, no, let's just start there. Please.
You got it. So
mirroring.
Imagine you're, being introduced to somebody's children, and let's say they're 4 and 6 years old, and the parent has already said, hello, this is, David, he's the future doctor, and hello, this is Lori, she's the future lawyer. The parent is basically mirroring to the child, and probably grotesquely, distortedly, who this person is and who they will become when they're adults, when they're 4 and 6 years old, respectively. Not a great idea. We've all been mirrored in certain ways, our teachers, other authorities, parents, uncles, aunts, etc. I mean, I remember the very first person who I remember calling me stupid was actually an adult family member, and I will never forget it. Not a parent, and he's no longer in the family, he divorced out. But I remember him calling me stupid, and that was a form of mirroring. Meanwhile, I had my grandpa Ben, who was like, Adam, do you realize the gifts you have? You're gonna make it, kid. You're gonna make it. And so my grandpa was giving me a very different form of mirroring. And one of the ways I like to think about it is, for those of us who remember funhouse mirrors, where you have these distorted mirrors and you get to see yourself, and then these like these vertical or horizontal or whatever it is. It's just like really, really interesting and funny, except for the fact that it's not funny when a grown-up does that with us when we're children, and it even happens later in life, We might get an evaluation from a boss saying, you are not a people person, when in fact you are. They're just seeing you through their lens. And you might not be getting good mirroring. You might actually be getting some good mirroring at times. Maybe they are noticing something that we aren't willing to notice. You and I would probably refer to it as kind of shadow, parts of ourselves that we would rather not acknowledge exist. And sometimes that's important. I'm not minimizing that because I don't want people to think, oh, if they say it, it's not true. It might actually be somewhat true. There may be some truth in it. Some of the best mirroring I've ever had has been the mirroring I did not want. But it was really crucial for me to take a look at myself and say, oh, wow, can't see myself. I don't know about you, but I remember the very first time I saw myself give a public talk on video, and I cringed and nearly fell on the floor. I was doing all kinds of things that were not consistent with the way I imagined myself to be. I thought I was smooth, suave, TV ready. No, I was uttering ums. I had these weird mannerisms where I'd roll up my sleeves like nervously and lip smacking, and all this other stuff was going on. And I'm so glad I saw it because I was able to change it after having seen it. So one of the best sources of mirroring can be ourselves on video and saying, how am I coming across versus how do I perceive myself to be coming across? And is there a discrepancy, and might I fine tune a few of these things? So yeah, mirroring can happen in a whole bunch of ways.
And I think thank you for that lovely background, because we're looking at mirroring, and our listener or anyone out there who's feeling alone or unworthy of connection or unlovable or broken because you're an introvert. Both Adam and I are here mirroring back to you that if you are alone because you want to have some solitary time, and that's what feels good to you, body, mind, and spirit, yes, that's good for you. If you are alone, not by choice, but because of habit or stuckness or fear, we are here mirroring to you that you can do this. You have an innate and natural ability to draw up your courage and reach out and connect to other people who will see you and reflect back to you that you are a good, worthy, wonderful person, and they will see you. And that is the beauty of healthy mirroring. As Adam clearly showed, there can be negative mirroring where somebody's telling you you're stupid or you're ugly or you're not worthy. And we don't want people like that in our lives. They're really not helpful. What we do want is, at our own pace and baby stepping it, to move out and connect with people who mirror back to us love. Because love, kindness, compassion, empathy, seeing us, and anyone out there listening who's feeling lonely, you can find that. Might take you a little while to find it, but it is there. So thank you, Adam, for that platform. And I'm aware of our time here. So yikes. Can you just give us some quick strokes about about finding your connective?
Yeah. So the 4 ways that we connect are: we connect with ourselves first, and it ripples outwards like circles. It's the most important connection is how we connect with ourselves, because it informs all other connections. The second way is how we connect with others. It could include how I connect with my wife, how I connect with my kids, how I'm connecting with you. The third ripple is how we connect with the world. The world can include things like work, art, and nature. And the fourth is how we connect with something greater. Now, for some people, it might be religion. For some people, it might be some form of spirituality. But even for the most devout, orthodox atheist, when they go someplace beautiful, like to the Grand Canyon, they will say, wow. And they're having an experience of awe, AWE, which has been put under the microscope to great effect. We now know that awe is like gratitude on steroids. It does great things for ourselves and our bodies, our brains, and the people around us. We may end up hugging and be more loving. So the book aims to help people find their own connection formulas. All 8 billion of us have different ways that we need to connect. Slightly, there may be overlap, but there are always individual differences. And it defines connection, and it doesn't tell you what to do, but it gives you places gentle nudges of where to look and ways to ascertain, is this in fact a real connection for me or not?
Thank you for that beautifully eloquent overview. And listeners, an important takeaway, your formula, and Dr. Adam did call this out, your formula will be different from someone else's. And where I personally see people get suffering added to their plate is when they're looking at their life and they have one or two close friends, or not really a lot of close friends, but family members that they feel close to, whether they're, in the same town or far. And they're comparing themselves to friends on Facebook or somebody they know who has 30 friends or 50 friends or 82 friends. So remember, what works for you is going to be different from what works for someone else. So don't let yourself get into that loop of comparing yourself. Dr. Adam, thank you so much. I had to sneak that piece in there. Thank you for bearing with me. Where can our listeners find you? Brilliant self.
DrAdamDorsay.com. Just look me up. I'm very easy to Google. And my TEDx talks and my book is available on Amazon. But the TEDx talks are, of course, available on YouTube. And my podcast, which is nearing 250 episodes, is available on all platforms.
Listeners, don't worry. You can look in the show notes for Dr. Adam's book, his TEDx talks, his website. You will be able to find him in the show notes. Dr. Adam, thank you so much for sharing your time, your energy, and your wisdom with us today. I'm so grateful, and it's been such a pleasure.
Likewise, Dr. Carla. Great to be with you.
Great to be with you, and thank you to our listeners. And this is Imperfect Love.
Thanks so much for sharing your time with me today. Remember, you have the power to transform your life and love fearlessly, if imperfectly, and it's my privilege to help you along the way. You can find more life-changing content, including my books and other podcast episodes, at drcarlamanly.com. Feel free to submit your own confidential questions through my website. I'll do my very best to include your issue on a future episode. If you found this podcast helpful, please subscribe and leave a review. Until we connect again, this is Dr. Carla Marie Manly wishing you oceans of blessings and love. Please note, this podcast is psychoeducational in nature and is not intended to replace formal mental health support. Please contact your healthcare provider or emergency hotline if you need psychiatric care. And as always, please take good care of your amazing, wonderful self.